The Galactic Unity Academy was the most beautiful place Emma had ever seen in her short life, and she was only 8 years old when she first stepped onto the station that floated between 3 different solar systems like a giant silver flower. In the endless black of space, Emma remembered how her mother had cried at the spaceport back on Earth and how her father had knelt down to look her in the eyes and told her that she was going to do something important and that she was going to show the galaxy what humans were made of. But Emma had not understood what he meant at the time because she was just a little girl who liked to play in the mud and chase butterflies in the backyard. The academy was home to children from over 100 different species, and Emma had never imagined that so many different kinds of people could exist in the universe, and some of them were tall like trees with skin that changed colors when they talked, and some of them were small like mice, but with 6 arms and glowing eyes, and some of them were made of crystals that sang when light passed through their bodies. Emma was the only human child at the academy because humanity had only joined the Galactic Concord 15 years ago, and most of the other species still thought of humans as strange, primitive creatures who had barely learned to leave their own planet, and the instructors were polite to her, but she could tell that they did not expect much from her, and the other children looked at her like she was a curiosity rather than a friend. The Valari children were the tallest, and they had beautiful scales that shimmered like rainbows, and they moved with a grace that made Emma feel clumsy and small, and they never invited her to play their floating games in the zero-gravity chambers. And the Thrix children had 4 arms and compound eyes, and they could communicate without speaking by touching their antennae together, and they would gather in groups and click at each other in ways that Emma could not understand. Emma spent most of her first month at the academy feeling lonely and lost, and she would sit in the corners of the great halls and watch the other children play and laugh and learn together while she struggled to keep up with lessons that were designed for minds much older and more advanced than hers. But Emma had one thing that no other child at the academy had, and that was Kevin. Kevin was a honey badger, and he had come with Emma from Earth as her companion animal because the academy rules said that every student could bring one bonded creature from their homeworld to help them feel less homesick, and the Valari children brought their wind serpents, which were long and silver and could float on air currents, and the Shimmer children brought their light sprites, which were tiny, glowing creatures that danced around their heads, and the Thrix children brought their moss colonies, which were green and fuzzy, and could share thoughts with their owners. When Emma had told the academy administrators that she was bringing a honey badger, they had looked at her with confusion, and one of them had pulled up information about the creature on a holographic display and said that it seemed like a very unremarkable animal with low intelligence and no special abilities, and Emma had just smiled and said that Kevin was special to her. Kevin was about 60 pounds of gray and black fur with a white stripe running down his back, and he had small dark eyes that always seemed to be watching everything, and strong claws that could dig through almost anything, and a thick loose skin that her father had told her was one of his most important features, though Emma did not fully understand why at the time. The other children thought Kevin was boring and ugly, and one of the Valari boys named Tall had laughed at Emma and said that her companion animal looked like it was designed by someone who had given up halfway through, and the other children had laughed too, and Emma had felt her face get hot with embarrassment. But she had not said anything because she did not know how to defend Kevin with words. But Kevin did not seem to care what the other children thought about him, and he would walk beside Emma through the halls of the academy with his strange rolling gait and his eyes always moving and watching, and when Emma sat down to eat her meals in the cafeteria, Kevin would sit beside her and eat whatever she gave him, and he would make soft grunting sounds that Emma found comforting at night. Kevin would sleep at the foot of Emma's bed in her small quarters, and sometimes Emma would wake up from bad dreams about being so far from home and so far from her parents, and she would reach down and feel Kevin warm fur under her fingers, and she would feel a little bit better. The academy instructors did not pay much attention to Kevin, because they thought he was just a simple animal with no real purpose and instructor. Vel, who was a tall Velari woman with scales that were dark blue like the deep ocean, had once asked Emma why she had not chosen a more impressive companion, and Emma had not known how to answer. Emma's father had given her Kevin when she was 5 years old, and he had told her that honey badgers were very special animals, even though they did not look like much, and he had told her stories about how honey badgers on Earth were not afraid of anything, not lions or snakes or even humans, and how they would fight creatures 10 times their size without hesitation, and how their skin was so thick and loose that even if something bit them, they could twist around inside their own skin and bite back. Emma had not understood everything her father had told her, but she had understood that Kevin was a gift, and that her father trusted Kevin to take care of her when he could not be there himself. The months passed, and Emma began to learn the language of the academy, which was a mixture of sounds and gestures and sometimes colors, and she began to understand her lessons better, and she even made one friend, a small shimmer girl named Lyra, who was also lonely because her crystal body made sounds that the other children found annoying. Emma and Lyra would sit together in the gardens of the academy, where plants from 100 different worlds grew in carefully controlled environments, and they would talk about their homes and their families and their dreams, and Kevin would sit beside them and watch the strange alien insects that buzzed through the flowers. But even as Emma began to feel more at home at the academy, she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong, and sometimes late at night she would hear strange sounds in the corridors, and she would see the instructors talking in hushed voices with worried expressions on their faces, and she would ask what was happening, but they would just smile and tell her that everything was fine. Emma did not know that far away in the dark spaces between stars, a group called the Krath Dominion was planning something terrible, and she did not know that they had chosen the academy as their target because it was full of children whose parents were powerful and important. And she did not know that very soon everything she thought she knew about the galaxy and about herself and about Kevin was going to change forever. All Emma knew was that she was a small human girl in a very big universe, and that she had a honey badger who loved her, and that somehow that was going to have to be enough. The attack came during the sleep cycle, when most of the academy was dark and quiet, and the children were dreaming in their beds, and the instructors were resting in their quarters, and the security systems were running on their normal automated routines. Emma was asleep with Kevin curled up at her feet when the first explosion shook the station, and she woke up with her heart pounding in her chest, and for a moment she did not know where she was or what was happening. And then the alarms started screaming, and red lights began flashing in the corridors outside her door. Kevin was already awake and standing on the bed with his fur raised along his spine and his small dark eyes fixed on the door, and he was making a low growling sound that Emma had never heard him make before, and it scared her almost as much as the alarms. The door to Emma's quarters slid open, and instructor Vel stood there with her blue scales pale and her large eyes wide with fear, and she was shouting for all the children to follow her and to stay together and to move quickly. And Emma grabbed Kevin and held him against her chest and ran after the instructor into the chaos of the corridor. Children were everywhere, crying and screaming and running in different directions, and the instructors were trying to gather them and guide them to safety. But there was so much confusion and so much fear, and Emma could see that even the adults did not know exactly what was happening. Vel led a group of about 30 children through the winding corridors of the academy, and Emma ran as fast as her short legs could carry her, with Kevin bouncing in her arms, and she could hear explosions and weapons fire somewhere in the distance, and she could smell smoke and something else that smelled like burning metal. They reached the Eastern Conservatory, which was a large room filled with plants and trees from dozens of different worlds, and Vel sealed the heavy doors behind them and told the children to hide among the plants and to stay quiet and to not make any sounds no matter what they heard. Emma found a spot beneath a large bush with purple leaves and blue flowers, and she pressed herself against the wall and held Kevin tight against her chest. And she could feel his heart beating fast like a tiny drum, and she could feel her own heart beating just as fast. The other children were hiding too, and Emma could see their scared faces peeking out from behind plants and under benches, and some of them were crying quietly, and some of them were shaking, and the little shimmer girl, Lyra, was nearby, and her crystal body was making soft tinkling sounds that she could not control. Vel stood by the door with a ceremonial blade in her hands, and Emma knew that the blade was just for decoration, and that Vel was a teacher, not a fighter, but the instructor stood there anyway, ready to defend them with whatever she had. Time passed slowly, and every second felt like an hour, and Emma could hear sounds from outside the conservatory doors, and sometimes she heard shouting in a language she did not understand, and sometimes she heard weapons firing, and sometimes she heard screaming, and each sound made her hold Kevin tighter, and then the sounds came closer and closer until they were right outside the doors, and Emma heard heavy footsteps and rough voices, and then something slammed against the doors so hard that the whole room shook. The doors held for a moment, and then another moment, and then there was another slam and another, and the metal began to bend inward, and Vel raised her blade and told the children to stay hidden and to stay quiet, and Emma could see that the instructor's hands were shaking. The doors broke open and soldiers poured into the conservatory, and they were wearing heavy black armor and carrying weapons that glowed with energy, and their helmets covered their faces. So Emma could not see what they looked like, but she could tell from the way they moved that they were not here to help. The soldiers were Krath, and Emma had heard that name before in whispered conversations between instructors, and she knew that the Krath were bad, and that they had rejected the peace that the rest of the galaxy had agreed to, and that they did terrible things to people who got in their way. The first Krath soldier through the door saw Vel standing there with her blade, and he did not even slow down, and he just swung his armored fist and knocked her to the ground, and Vel's blade went spinning away across the floor, and she lay there not moving. The SQUAD leader walked into the conservatory and looked around at all the hiding places, and he laughed, and it was a cold, ugly sound, and he said that the children should come out now, and that there was no point in hiding because they were going to find everyone anyway. One by one, the children came out of their hiding spots because they were too scared to stay hidden, and the soldiers grabbed them roughly and pushed them into a group in the center of the room, and some of the children were crying, and some were screaming for their parents, and the Krath soldiers did not care. The squad leader pointed at the Valari children and said to collect them first because their parents were rich and powerful and would pay anything to get them back, and Emma understood then what was happening, and she understood that these soldiers were going to take them all away and use them to hurt their families. Emma watched as soldiers grabbed her classmates, and as children screamed and pleaded, and as the Valari boy, Tal, who had laughed at Kevin, was dragged away with tears running down his scaled face, and she felt something cold and hard forming in her chest, and she did not know if it was fear or anger or something else entirely. Kevin was squirming in her arms, and she could feel his muscles tensing and coiling like springs, and she could feel his claws pressing against her skin, and she looked down at him and saw that his eyes were fixed on the soldiers with an intensity that she had never seen before. And Emma remembered what her father had told her before she left Earth, when he had knelt down and looked her in the eyes and given her one final piece of advice. If you are ever truly scared, he had said, and if you are ever in real danger, then let Kevin go, and he will know what to do. Emma had not understood what her father meant at the time, but now as she watched the Krath soldiers hurting her classmates, and as she felt Kevin straining against her arms, she began to understand. She thought about her mother crying at the spaceport, and her father telling her that she was going to show the galaxy what humans were made of, and she thought about all the times the other children had laughed at Kevin and called him boring and ugly, and she thought about how the instructors had said he was just a simple animal with no special abilities. Emma looked at the squad leader as he directed his soldiers to collect more children, and she looked at Vel lying still on the ground, and she looked at little Lyra being dragged away by a soldier twice her size, and she made her decision. She opened her arms and let Kevin go. Kevin hit the floor running, and he did not look back at Emma, and he did not hesitate, and he did not slow down, and he moved across the conservatory floor like a gray and black blur of fur and muscle and ancient, unstoppable fury, the first Krath. Soldier did not even see him coming because the soldier was too busy grabbing a crying Thrix child, and he did not think to look down at the small creature racing toward him across the floor, and by the time he felt something hit his leg, it was already too late. Kevin's claws were not large, but they were sharp and strong, and they had evolved over millions of years on a planet called Earth, where everything was trying to kill everything else, and where only the toughest and meanest and most stubborn creatures survived, and those claws tore through the gap in the soldier armor at the knee joint like it was made of paper. The soldier screamed and dropped the child he was holding and reached down to grab at the thing that was attacking him, but Kevin was already moving and twisting, and his loose, thick skin meant that even when the soldier got a grip on him, Kevin just turned inside his own skin and bit down on the soldier hand with jaws that could crush bone. The other soldiers turned to see what was happening, and they saw their comrade falling to the ground with a small furry creature attached to him, and they raised their weapons, but they did not know where to aim because Kevin was moving so fast and he was so close to their fallen friend that they could not get a clear shot. The squad leader shouted for them to kill the animal, and two soldiers fired their energy weapons and the bright bolts hit Kevin once and then twice, and Emma screamed because she thought her friend was dead, but Kevin did not fall, and Kevin did not stop, and Kevin did not even seem to notice that he had been shot. The soldiers did not understand what they were seeing because on their world and on most worlds in the galaxy, when an animal was hurt, it would run away or curl up and submit, but Kevin did none of those things. Instead, he launched himself at the next soldier with blood on his claws and fury. In his small dark eyes, pain was something that Kevin understood, but it was not something that controlled him because honey badgers had evolved to fight through pain and to ignore injuries that would stop any other creature and to keep attacking until either they won or they died, and Kevin had no intention of dying today. The second soldier went down screaming as Kevin found the gap between his helmet and his chest armor, and the third soldier tried to run, but Kevin was faster and caught him before he made it 3 steps, and the other children watched in shock and horror and amazement as this small earth creature tore through the Krath squad like they were nothing. One of the soldiers managed to hit Kevin with the butt of his weapon and sent him tumbling across the floor, and for a moment Kevin lay still, and Emma's heart stopped, but then Kevin was back on his feet and shaking his head and charging again with a sound that was half growl and half scream. The squad leader raised his weapon and aimed carefully and fired a direct shot at Kevin. Center mass, and the bolt hit Kevin and knocked him backward, and smoke rose from his fur, and Emma was crying now because surely this time Kevin was finished. But Kevin stood up again. He stood up and he looked at the squad leader with those small, dark eyes, and he made a sound that was like nothing the Krath had ever heard before, and it was a sound that said, "I am not afraid of you, and I will never be afraid of you, and I will keep coming until one of us is dead." The squad leader felt something he had not felt in a very long time, and it took him a moment to recognize it because he was a hardened soldier who had fought in dozens of battles and had killed more enemies than he could count. But what he felt now looking at this small, bloody, unstoppable creature was fear. He tried to run. Kevin caught him at the door. The fight did not last long after that because Kevin was not just angry, and he was not just fearless, but he was also smart in the way that predators are smart. and he knew how to take down prey that was bigger and stronger and better armed than him, and he knew how to find the weak spots and exploit them when it was over 12 Krath. Soldiers lay on the floor of the conservatory, and some of them were dead, and some of them were just injured, but none of them were getting up, and none of them were going to hurt any more children. Kevin stood in the middle of the room, covered in blood and breathing hard, and his fur was matted and burned in places from the energy weapon hits, and he had wounds that would have killed most animals 3 times over, but he was still standing, and he was still watching, and he was still ready to fight if any more enemies came through those broken doors. Emma ran to him and fell to her knees beside him, and she wrapped her arms around him, even though he was covered in blood, and she cried into his fur and said his name over and over again, and Kevin made a soft sound that was almost like purring and pressed his head against her chest. The other children stared at Emma and Kevin, and they did not know what to say because they had just watched a creature they had thought was boring and useless and ugly destroy an entire squad of soldiers who had defeated their instructors and breached their security and taken their station. Little Lyra came forward slowly, and her crystal body was making confused sounds, and she looked at Kevin and then at Emma, and she asked how, and Emma did not have an answer because she did not fully understand it herself. Belle stirred on the floor and slowly pushed herself up, and her scales were cracked where the soldier had hit her, and she was clearly in pain, but she was alive, and she looked at the carnage around her, and she looked at Emma sitting on the floor holding her blood-soaked honey badger, and she did not know what to think. The Valari boy Tao was standing with the other children, and his face was pale, and his earlier arrogance was gone, and he looked at Kevin with something that might have been respect or might have been terror or might have been both. Emma just sat there holding Kevin and whispering to him that he was a good boy and that she was so proud of him and that everything was going to be okay now. And Kevin closed his eyes and let her hold him because the fighting was done for now, and he had protected his human, and that was all that mattered. Outside the conservatory, the battle for the academy was still raging, but in this one room there was silence, except for the sound of children breathing and the soft purring of a honey badger who had just shown the galaxy what Earth creatures were made of. The rescue teams arrived 3 hours after the attack began, and they came in fast assault ships with soldiers in heavy armor, and they swept through the academy deck by deck, clearing out the remaining Krath forces and searching for survivors. When they reached the Eastern Conservatory, they were expecting to find the worst because their scanners had detected weapons fire and heat signatures that suggested a major battle, and the team leader was a grizzled veteran named Commander Vex, who had seen terrible things in his long career, and he prepared himself to see more. What he found instead was something he could not explain to Krath. Soldiers lay scattered across the floor of the conservatory, and they were some of the most elite troops in the Dominion military, and they were equipped with armor and weapons that should have made them nearly unstoppable, and yet here they lay defeated and broken, and in the center of the room sat a small human girl holding a bloody animal in her lap, and around her stood 32 children who were scared and shaken but completely unharmed. Commander Vex walked slowly into the room and looked around at the carnage, and he looked at the wounds on the fallen soldiers, and he could not understand what kind of weapon could have caused such damage, and he turned to the Valari instructor, who was sitting against the wall with her cracked scales, and asked her what had happened. Val pointed at Emma and at Kevin and said that the human child companion animal had done this, and Commander Vex thought she must be confused from her injuries because what she was saying made no sense. But the other children confirmed the story, and they told Vex about how the honey badger had attacked the soldiers and how it had been shot multiple times, and how it had just kept fighting and kept going and never stopped until every enemy was down. Vex looked at the small creature in the human girl arms, and he saw the burns on its fur from energy weapons, and he saw the wounds that should have killed it, and he saw its small dark eyes watching him with an intelligence and awareness that made him Uncomfortable, he called for medical teams to treat the children and the instructor, and he called for his own medics to examine the animal, and the medics came and looked at Kevin, and they said that the creature had injuries that would have killed a Thrix war beast, and that they did not understand how it was still alive and refused to let go of Kevin while the medics worked, and she told them that Kevin was tough, and that he was from Earth, and that honey badgers did not give up, and the medics did not know what to make of her or her strange companion. The footage from the academy security cameras was recovered within hours, and it showed everything that had happened in the conservatory from the moment the craft broke down the doors to the moment Kevin finished his attack, and when the footage was reviewed by military analysts across the Galactic Concord, they did not believe what they were seeing. The video spread across the galactic networks. Within days, and billions of beings from hundreds of species watched a small Earth creature destroy an elite craft squad, and they watched it take hit after hit from energy weapons and keep fighting, and they watched it show no fear and no hesitation and no mercy. Analysts wrote reports, and the reports were sent to military commanders and political leaders and scientists. And they all said the same thing, which was that they did not understand how this was possible, and they wanted to know more about this species called humans and this planet called Earth. Ambassadors from 14 different species requested urgent meetings with Earth diplomatic corps, and they all had the same question, which was, what else do you have? The human ambassador was a quiet woman named Rachel, who had been expecting this moment for years, because she and the other leaders of Earth had known that someday the galaxy would learn the truth about their homeworld and about the creatures that lived there. Rachel stood before the assembled ambassadors in a great hall on a neutral station, and she smiled a small smile, and she transmitted a data file to their displays, and she said that she was happy to share information about Earth and its fauna. The ambassadors opened the file and began to read, and as they read, their faces changed from curiosity to confusion to something that looked very much like fear. The file contained information about Earth, other creatures, and it started with the persistence hunters, which were animals that could not run as fast as their prey, but could chase them for days without rest until the prey simply collapsed from exhaustion and died. It contained information about pack hunters, like wolves, who could coordinate their attacks without speaking and who would work together to bring down prey many times their size. It contained information about the great apes, who could learn language and use tools and solve complex problems, and who had been known to wage wars against each other. Contained information about the deep-sea creatures that humans had discovered in the darkest depths of their oceans, and these creatures were nightmares made flesh with glowing lures and endless teeth and bodies, designed to survive pressures that would crush any alien vessel. It contained information about the parasites and the venomous creatures and the things that lived in the jungles and the deserts and the frozen wastes, and every page revealed new horrors that the galaxy had never imagined. At the bottom of the file, Rachel had included a note that said the honey badger that had defended the Academy children was considered by humans to be a moderately dangerous animal, and that it was not even close to the most formidable creature on Earth. The ambassadors sat in silence for a long moment, and then one of them, a Velari elder with scales that had faded to gray with age, asked Rachel a question, asked why humans had not told the galaxy about this before, and why they had let everyone believe that Earth was a quiet, peaceful world with simple, unremarkable creatures. Rachel thought about the question for a moment, and then she said that no one had asked, and that humans had learned long ago that it was better to be underestimated than to be feared, because when you were underestimated, your enemies did not see you coming. The ambassadors looked at each other, and they understood that they had made a terrible mistake, and that they had spent 15 years treating humans like primitives and children, when they should have been treating them like equals, or perhaps like something even more dangerous. Rachel smiled again and said that she hoped this new information would lead to better understanding between humans and the rest of the galaxy, and that Earth looked forward to sharing more about their world and their creatures and their history. The ambassadors agreed that more sharing would be good, and they left the meeting with a new respect for the small, soft, short-lived species that came from a death world called Earth. 6 months passed after the attack on the Academy, and during those 6 months, everything changed for Emma and for Kevin and for all of humanity. Emma had been sent home to Earth to recover from her ordeal, and she had spent weeks in the arms of her parents, who had cried and held her and told her how proud they were and how brave she had been, and Kevin had been treated by the best veterinarians on the planet, and his wounds had healed, though he now had scars that would never fade. The galaxy could not stop talking about what had happened at the Academy, and the footage of Kevin's attack was shown on news, broadcast and analyzed in military academies, and discussed in political meetings. Across 100 worlds and everywhere, beings were asking the same questions about humans and about Earth, and about what else might be waiting on that strange blue planet. Emma received messages from all over the galaxy, from children and adults who wanted to thank her and who wanted to know more about honey badgers, and who wanted to tell her that she was a hero. And Emma did not feel like a hero, and she told her parents that Kevin was the hero and not her. When the Academy reopened, Emma was invited to return, and her parents asked her if she wanted to go back to the place where such terrible things had happened. And Emma thought about it for a long time, and then she said yes, because she had friends there, and because she had unfinished business, and because she was not going to let the Krath take anything else from her. But this time, Emma did not go alone. Earth had decided that it was time to send more human children to the Academy, and to show the galaxy that humanity was ready to take its place among the stars. And so 15 children were chosen from all over the planet, and they were trained and prepared and given companion animals of their own. Emma met the other human children at the spaceport before they left, and she saw that they were nervous and excited and scared, just like she had been a year ago, as she told them that the Academy was wonderful, and that they would make friends and learn amazing things, and that they should not be afraid. A boy named Daniel had brought a German shepherd with brown and black fur and sharp ears and intelligent eyes, and the dog walked beside him with a calm confidence that made Emma smile. A girl named Nicole had brought a raven that sat on her shoulder and looked around with bright, curious eyes and made sounds that sounded almost like words, and Nicole said that ravens were very smart and could learn to solve puzzles and mimic speech. A boy named James had brought a cat, which was a small orange tabby that looked soft and lazy and harmless, and Emma laughed when she saw it, because she knew that cats were not what they appeared to be, and that this little creature would probably cause more trouble than all the other animals combined. The journey back to the Academy was long, but Emma did not mind, because she spent the time getting to know the other human children and their companion animals, and she told them stories about the Academy, and about the different species they would meet, and about what to expect when they arrived at the Academy. Everything was different, and Emma could feel it the moment she stepped off the ship, and the other species looked at the human children in a way that they had never looked before. And it was not with pity or condescension, but with respect and maybe a little bit of fear. The Valari children, who had once ignored Emma, now came to greet her, and they bowed their heads in the way that Valari did to show respect to equals, and the Thrix children clicked their greetings in friendly patterns, and even the instructors treated the human children differently. Instructor Vel was waiting for Emma in the main hall, and her scales had healed, though there were still marks where they had been cracked, and she walked forward slowly and looked down at Emma and Kevin, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then Vel bent down in a gesture that Valari rarely made, and she looked Emma in the eyes, and she said that she wanted to thank her and to apologize. And Emma asked what she was apologizing for. Vel said that she was apologizing for underestimating humans and for treating Emma like she was less than the other children, and for not understanding what a honey badger really was. And Emma said that it was okay, because everyone made that mistake. The other human children spread out through the Academy, and they made friends, and they learned, and they showed the galaxy that humans were not primitive or weak or unremarkable, and their companion. Animals showed everyone that Earth creatures were not to be underestimated. Daniel German Shepherd became famous for its loyalty and intelligence, and the way it could sense danger before anyone else, and the Valari children, who had once thought they were the most graceful beings in the galaxy, watched in awe as the dog ran and jumped and caught things in its mouth. Nicole Raven learned the languages of 3 different species within the first month, and it would fly through the academy repeating phrases and mimicking voices, and sometimes it would play tricks on the instructors, and Nicole would pretend to be innocent while the raven laughed in a way that sounded almost human. James Cat broke into every restricted area on the station within the first week, and no one could figure out how it did it, and security teams would find the little orange tabby sleeping in places that should have been impossible to reach, and James would just shrug and say that cats were like that. But none of the other animals were treated with quite the same respect, as Kevin had become a legend, and the other children would gather around when he walked through the halls, and they would whisper to each other about what he had done, and some of them were afraid of him, but most of them were simply amazed that such a small creature could have done such incredible things. The Krath Dominion had heard about what happened at the academy, and their military leaders had studied the footage and written reports, and they had decided that attacking human interests might not be wise, because if one small Earth creature could do so much damage, then what might happen if they faced a whole army of humans with their wolves and their dogs and their great apes? Emma sat in the conservatory one day, in the same spot where everything had happened 6 months ago, and she looked at the plants and the flowers, and she remembered the fear and the chaos, and the moment when she had let Kevin go. Kevin was sleeping beside her with his scarred fur, and his small dark eyes closed, and he looked peaceful and content, and Emma reached down and scratched him behind the ears, the way he liked. Lyra came and sat beside her, and the little Shimmer Girl crystal body made soft, happy sounds, and she said that she was glad Emma had come back, and Emma said that she was glad too. The Valari boy Tall walked past, and he paused and looked at Emma and Kevin, and for a moment it seemed like he might say something, but then he just nodded his head in respect and kept walking, and Emma knew that he would never laugh at her companion animal again. The academy was different now, and the galaxy was different now, and it was all because one small girl had trusted her father and let go of her honey badger when she needed him most. Emma looked out the window of the conservatory at the stars beyond, and she thought about Earth and about all the creatures that lived there, and she thought about how the galaxy had learned to respect humanity, and she smiled. Someday she would go home again, and she would tell her parents about everything that had happened, and she would show them the friends she had made and the things she had learned, and she would thank her father for giving her Kevin. But for now she was content to sit in the conservatory with her honey badger and her friend and watch the stars and know that she had shown the galaxy what humans were made of. And Kevin slept on knowing that his human was safe, and that was all that mattered to him, because honey badgers did not care about fame or legend or galactic politics, but they cared very much about the ones they loved, and Emma loved Kevin, and Kevin loved Emma, and together they had changed the galaxy forever.